Russia is collapsing, and it's collapsing soon. These were the first words that AI gave me when I posed the question, how will Russia collapse? The answer that followed was as startling as it was detailed. Not a nuclear war, not an invasion by a foreign power, but a slow-motion implosion from within, a scenario more unexpected than any of us imagined. In this video, we'll unpack the AI's prediction step by step. We'll explore the hard data and geopolitical trends behind this bold claim. From Russia's dwindling population and war casualties to brewing regional fractures. By the end, you'll understand why some experts say Russia has become a human volcano about to explode, and how its collapse might actually unfold. Let's dive in. Most people think collapse looks like tanks rolling through the streets or a mushroom cloud on the horizon. But the AI painted a different picture entirely. Russia's unraveling won't arrive with a bang. It's already underway, bleeding out slowly through wounds that can never fully heal. Start with the battlefield. As of late 2025, the UK Ministry of Defense estimates that Russian casualties, killed and wounded, have well surpassed 1.5 million. Let that sink in for a moment. Over 1 million Russian citizens removed from families, from the workforce, from the future. Independent journalists at Medusa and Mediazona, working with BBC Russian, have painstakingly verified the names of over 153,000 individual soldiers killed in Ukraine. They've done this through obituaries, court records, and inheritance filings, documenting each death one by one. And that's just the losses they can confirm. The true death toll is almost certainly far higher, with Western intelligence agencies placing the figure somewhere between 190,000 and 350,000 dead. The bodies aren't coming from Moscow's wealthy districts or St. Petersburg's educated elite. The verified death counts reveal something far starker. Bashkortostan, Tatarstan, and the Sverdlovsk region have suffered the highest confirmed fatalities. Russia's poorest and most remote communities are shouldering this burden, while the capital carries on as if nothing is happening. Moscow, a city of almost 13 million people, has lost a fraction of what small ethnic republics have sacrificed. The pattern is unmistakable, and the resentment is building. Those who survive the front lines often return shattered beyond recognition. The AI warned of a mass return of psychologically traumatized soldiers, and we're already witnessing the consequences ripple through Russian society. Surges in alcoholism, spikes in domestic violence, rising crime rates in communities now flooded with men who've spent years trapped in a meat grinder. Tens of thousands have come home missing limbs, suffering from traumatic brain injuries, completely unable to work or function in civilian life. The Russian healthcare system, already strained before the war, cannot begin to handle the flood of broken men requiring lifelong care. For every coffin draped in the Russian flag, there are 3 or 4 wounded veterans who will never be the same. This isn't just a military problem anymore, it's a social time bomb ticking in thousands of Russian towns and villages. And the fuse is getting shorter. But here's what the AI emphasized most strongly. Losing soldiers is only the visible wound. What's happening to Russia's population is far more permanent and far more terrifying. Russia isn't just losing men on the battlefield, it's running out of Russians entirely. In February 2025, demographers confirmed something that hasn't happened in over 2 centuries. Russia recorded its lowest monthly birth count since the early 1800s. Just 90,500 babies were born that month. 7,400 fewer than in February the year before. Think about that. The lowest in 200 years. The Kremlin has tried everything to reverse this trend. Tax breaks for large families, restrictions on abortion, propaganda glorifying motherhood and traditional values. None of it is working. The decline only accelerates. In 2024, Russia recorded just 1.222 million births, the lowest annual total since 1999, when the country was still reeling from the chaos of Soviet collapse. Compared to a decade ago, the annual number of births has dropped by 1/3, and by the end of 2024, Russia's natural population decline The gap between deaths and births reached 596,200 people. That's a 20% increase over the previous year. In some regions, the picture is even grimmer. In Vladimir and Volgograd, 3 times as many people died as were born. The nation is literally shrinking before our eyes. Some regions are collapsing faster than others. In Smolensk, births fell by 26.6% in early 2025. Kostroma dropped 21.6%. Karelia, Arkhangelsk, and Oryol all saw declines approaching 20%. These aren't marginal shifts, they're demographic freefalls. Meanwhile, the only regions showing birth rate growth are the Muslim republics of the North Caucasus, Dagestan, Chechnya, and Ingushetia. The very regions Moscow has used as cannon fodder are the only ones still producing children. The ethnic composition of Russia is shifting beneath the Kremlin's feet, and there's nothing Putin's propaganda machine can do to reverse it. Russia's fertility rate has crashed to 1.4 children per woman. To maintain a stable population, you need at least 2.1. Even Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov admitted the situation is catastrophic for the future of the nation. And according to UN projections, if current trends continue, Russia's population could plummet from 146 million today to somewhere between 74 and 112 million by the end of this century. That's not a gradual decline, that's demographic annihilation playing out across generations. The war has poured gasoline on a fire that was already burning. Hundreds of thousands of young men are dead or disabled. Hundreds of thousands more have fled the country to avoid conscription. And the women left behind? Many are choosing not to have children at all, unwilling to bring new life into a nation spiraling toward an uncertain future. Russia wanted to expand its territory. Instead, it's watching its population vanish. So Russia is bleeding soldiers and watching its birth rate crater. But here's where the AI's prediction gets even darker. They're also hemorrhaging the workers needed to keep the country functioning. By the end of 2024, Russian companies were short 2.6 million employees, a record high. The labor shortage has become so severe that unemployment has fallen to a historic low of 2.2% in May 2025. On paper, that sounds like good news. In reality, it's a symptom of economic disaster. There simply aren't enough people to fill the jobs that keep a modern nation functioning. Manufacturing is short 391,000 workers. Trade is missing 347,000. Transportation can't find 219,000 drivers and logistics staff. Employers have grown so desperate they've started offering salaries of 100,000 rubles a month, 1.5 times the national average, just to attract basic labor. Wages rose 20% in 2024 alone, the fastest increase on record. But inflation is devouring those gains, and businesses are being crushed from both sides. The defense industry tells the same story. Since 2023, Russian military factories have added 520,000 workers. Yet they're still 160,000 short of what they need to meet production targets. The Kremlin is literally robbing the civilian economy to feed the war machine, poaching workers from construction, agriculture, and services to build tanks and missiles instead. It's an economic death spiral with no obvious exit. And then there's the brain drain. Since February 2022, somewhere between 650,000 and 900,000 Russians have fled the country. These aren't random citizens looking for adventure abroad. They're IT specialists, engineers, entrepreneurs, journalists, academics, the people who build modern economies. In the first 3 months after the invasion alone, an estimated 70,000 tech professionals left Russia. Roughly 10% of the country's entire IT workforce gone almost overnight. These weren't people who could easily be replaced. They were the architects of Russia's digital economy, the minds behind its startups, the voices of its independent media. Many landed in Georgia, Armenia, Kazakhstan, and Turkey, anywhere that would take them without a visa. They set up remote work arrangements, launched businesses in exile, and built new lives far from the Kremlin's reach. Research from the Outrush Project found that only 8% of immigrants have returned between 2023 and 2024. And of those who came back in the months after the invasion, 80% left again by the summer of 2023. The Kremlin tried to dismiss them as traitors and Western puppets. But you can't build a modern economy with loyalty alone. You need talent, and Russia's talent walked out the door. A nation that can't replace its dead, can't attract workers, and can't retain its brightest minds is a nation living on borrowed time. But the AI pointed to something even more dangerous, something most people don't realize about Russia's so-called economic resilience. Western observers have marveled at Russia's apparent economic strength. GDP grew over 4% in 2024. The Kremlin boasts that sanctions have failed. But peel back the numbers, and you find something very different. An economy running on fumes, propped up by unsustainable war spending and rapidly depleting reserves. In 2024, Russia ran a budget deficit of 3.49 trillion rubles, roughly $34 billion. That's the third consecutive year with deficits exceeding 3 trillion. And here's the number that should terrify Moscow. If you strip out oil and gas revenue, Russia's deficit equals 7.3% of GDP. The state is completely dependent upon hydrocarbons to function. And those revenues are collapsing, projected down 22% in 2025 as sanctions force Russian crude to sell at steep discounts. The average price for Urals oil has dropped to around $57 per barrel against budget assumptions of nearly $70. The National Wealth Fund, Russia's emergency savings account, is being drained month after month to cover the shortfall. Meanwhile, military spending has exploded to levels not seen since the Soviet era. The 2025 budget allocates roughly $140 billion to defense, a 25% increase from the previous year. Defense and security combined now consume over 43% of federal spending. For the first time under Putin's rule, military expenditure has surpassed social welfare. Pensions are being squeezed, healthcare is being cut, education is being starved of resources, all to feed a war machine that devours everything in its path. The AI described Russia's economy as a zombie, technically alive but sustained entirely by artificial intervention. Factories producing tanks instead of tractors, workers building missiles instead of infrastructure, an entire nation redirected toward destruction rather than development. This isn't growth, it's consumption of the future to pay for the present. And the cracks are already showing in daily life. Inflation officially hit 9.5% by late 2024, but anyone shopping for groceries knows the real number is significantly higher. Eggs, butter, basic staples, prices have surged far beyond what official statistics admit. The central bank's 21% interest rate has made borrowing nearly impossible for small businesses and ordinary families trying to buy homes or start companies. Home prices have tripled since 2020, creating a real estate bubble that threatens to burst catastrophically. Between July and September 2025, Russians withdrew 659 billion rubles in cash from banks, nearly 5 times the amount during the same period the year before. Trust in the financial system is eroding fast. Putin can claim economic victory all he wants, but Russian mothers struggling to afford milk for their children know the truth. The prosperity is a mirage, and it's flickering. So the economy is warping under pressure. The workers are vanishing. The births have cratered. But the AI's prediction hinged on something most experts have ignored entirely: the fractures within Russia itself. Here's a truth that gets buried under headlines about Putin's strongman image. Russia isn't really one country. It's 89 regions and 21 ethnic republics stitched together by a combination of money, fear, and force. And that stitching is starting to come apart at the seams. Ethnic Russians make up about 72% of the population, but that percentage is declining year by year. In places like Tatarstan, Tatars constitute over half the population. In Chechnya, Dagestan, and Ingushetia, ethnic Russians are tiny minorities. Yakutia in Siberia is majority Yagut, sitting atop vast diamond and mineral wealth that Moscow has extracted for decades. These regions have their own languages, their own cultures, their own histories of resistance to Russian rule. They've been kept in line through subsidies from Moscow and the ever-present threat of overwhelming force. But both of those levers are weakening as the war drains resources and manpower. The war has exposed the ugly bargain at the heart of Russian federalism. Poor, remote non-Slavic regions have shouldered a grotesquely disproportionate share of casualties. Bashkortostan and Tatarstan top the verified death counts. Buryatia and Dagestan have suffered far higher losses per capita than wealthy Moscow. These communities are being used as cannon fodder for Putin's imperial ambitions, and they know it. In September 2022, something remarkable happened. As Putin announced his mobilization decree, protests erupted across the North Caucasus. Mothers and wives in Dagestan flooded the streets, shouting "No to war." Police cracked down hard, arresting hundreds, but the message was unmistakable. Resentment in minority regions is reaching a breaking point. These demonstrations were suppressed, but suppressed isn't the same as solved. The anger hasn't gone anywhere, it's just waiting. The Wagner mutiny in June 2023 revealed something even more alarming about the hollowness of Russian power. A private military force seized the major city of Rostov-on-Don and raced toward Moscow, virtually unopposed. They got within 200 kilometers of the capital before standing down. Putin's vaunted security apparatus couldn't stop them. His military, bogged down in Ukraine, couldn't respond. The so-called second most powerful army in the world couldn't even defend its own heartland from a mercenary rebellion. Consider Tatarstan's history for a moment. In 1992, it was the last republic to sign Russia's Federation Treaty, and only after extracting significant autonomy concessions. Tatarstan has its own language and its own cultural identity, its own oil reserves that Moscow has exploited for decades. When Putin systematically stripped away regional autonomy starting in 2000, Tatars didn't forget. They simply waited for circumstances to change. Or look at Chechnya, where Russia fought two devastating wars that killed tens of thousands of civilians. The current peace is a transaction. Kadyrov's loyalty purchased with money and impunity to run his fiefdom as he sees fit. But transactions can always be renegotiated. And when Moscow can no longer pay, Kadyrov will calculate his next move very differently. The AI's analysis was stark. Russia has never truly been a nation-state. It's an empire held together by coercion. And empires don't decline gracefully. When the center weakens, the edges break away. Those fractures are already forming. The regions are restless. The economy is cracking. The military is bleeding out. But the AI's answer ultimately came down to one final vulnerability: the man attempting to hold it all together through sheer force of will. Vladimir Putin built his entire system on the projection of strength. The strongman who restored order after the chaos of the 1990s. The leader who crushed Chechen separatists, who seized Crimea without firing a shot, who defied the West and got away with it. For 2 decades, that image held Russia together. Fear of Putin meant fear of challenging the system he created. But the Wagner mutiny shattered something fundamental that cannot be repaired. A warlord captured a major Russian city in mere hours, when the Russian army had spent months failing to capture far smaller Ukrainian towns. Putin was forced to negotiate with a man who had openly called his defense minister a traitor. He looked weak, he looked scared, he looked replaceable. That perception, once lost, never fully returns. Since then, the Kremlin has been consumed by paranoia and internal purges. Waves of dismissals have swept through the military and security services as Putin's inner circle hunts for traitors and disloyal elements. Prigozhin died in a mysterious plane crash exactly 2 months after the mutiny, a brutal message to anyone else considering defiance. But fear only works when people believe in your power, and that belief is eroding with every passing month. Putin is now in his 70s, and the question of succession looms over everything like a shadow. There is no clear heir apparent, no designated replacement, no mechanism for peaceful transition of power. If Putin dies suddenly, whether from illness, assassination, or simply old age, the system faces a power vacuum that could trigger exactly the kind of elite infighting that collapsed the Soviet Union. If he clings to power too long, the rot only accelerates. decision-making paralyzed by an aging autocrat surrounded by yes-men too terrified to tell him the truth. History offers a stark warning here. Russian governments have collapsed after military disasters before. The Russo-Japanese War in 1905 sparked revolution that nearly toppled the Tsar. World War I led directly to 1917 and the complete destruction of the Romanov dynasty. Defeat in Afghanistan accelerated the Soviet Union's final unraveling. If Ukraine pushes Russian forces back decisively, or if Putin is forced into a peace agreement seen as surrender, the consequences could be catastrophic for the regime. Hardliners might revolt against what they see as betrayal. The public's quiet acquiescence might transform into open rage. Elite factions might finally make their move. The man who built a throne on fear now lives in fear himself, and that's exactly when empires become most dangerous and most vulnerable. So here's what the AI predicted would happen next. The scenario that emerged from the data was chilling in its plausibility. The collapse unfolds in stages. First, the war drags on without clear victory. International pressure continues to tighten. A successful Ukrainian operation shocks the Russian public by retaking territory Moscow had claimed was permanently annexed. Discontent, long suppressed beneath the surface, begins to emerge into the open. Then comes the trigger. Maybe it's a sudden oil price collapse as the world transitions away from fossil fuels. Maybe it's a new round of sanctions that finally breaks the banking system. Maybe it's simply the cumulative weight of everything: the deaths, the deficits, the despair. Whatever the spark, the ruble enters freefall. Banks freeze withdrawals to prevent a run. Pensions go unpaid across entire regions. The social contract that kept Russians quiet for 2 decades, stability in exchange for obedience, disintegrates overnight. In Moscow, the scramble for power begins immediately. With Putin incapacitated, absent, or simply unable to maintain control, factions within the security services turn on each other. The FSB against military intelligence. Rival generals backing different potential successors. What starts as political maneuvering behind closed doors turns violent in the streets. And while Moscow burns, the regions make their move. Chechnya's Ramzan Kadyrov declares his forces will maintain order independently until stability returns to Moscow. It's succession dressed in careful diplomatic language, but everyone understands what it means. Dagestan and Ingushetia follow suit, local militias and nationalist groups filling the vacuum left by departing federal troops. Tatarstan's parliament convenes emergency sessions, voting to assume sovereign powers until constitutional order is restored. Bashkortostan joins them within days. Turkey and Central Asian states move quickly to recognize these new Turkic brother nations, emerging from the wreckage. In Siberia, governors don't bother declaring independence. They simply stop taking orders from a capital that can no longer enforce them. A Siberian Emergency Council forms to manage fuel and food supplies, since Moscow has abandoned any pretense of governance. Officials in Vladivostok reach out to China for economic assistance to keep their region functioning. The Far East slides quietly but inevitably into Beijing's orbit. The world watches in disbelief as maps are redrawn in real time. International organizations scramble to respond to a crisis no one is prepared for. The UN debates peacekeeping missions with no clear mandate. NATO quietly secures the perimeter around Kaliningrad, the isolated Russian exclave on the Baltic, terrified of loose nuclear weapons falling into uncertain hands. Kazakhstan and Finland close their borders to prevent spillover chaos from consuming their own territories. And in Moscow, whatever rump government remains controls little beyond the capital and its immediate surroundings. A shadow of an empire that once stretched across 11 time zones. It sounds dramatic, almost fantastical. But remember this, just a few years before the Soviet Union fell, almost no expert predicted its dissolution. In 1989, the Eastern Bloc looked permanent, eternal, unmovable. By 1991, it was gone, dissolved largely peacefully into 15 new independent countries. The Russian Federation's fracturing, if it happens, might not be so peaceful, but it's no longer unthinkable. The AI's analysis simply followed current trajectories to their local conclusion. None of the factors we've discussed were invented or exaggerated. Every statistic came from verified sources. Russian government data, independent researchers, Western intelligence assessments. The population is shrinking at an accelerating rate. The war is causing immense and irreversible strain. The economy is warping under impossible pressures. The regions have deep historical grievances that never disappeared. The leader is aging without a succession plan. Each crisis feeds and amplifies the others, and empires throughout history have fallen when multiple failures converged simultaneously. The Carnegie Endowment called Russia's demographic crisis its most dangerous yet. The Small Wars Journal warned of cascading human capacity problems that compound over time. Analysts have described Russia as a human volcano about to explode. These aren't fringe voices or wishful thinking from Russia's enemies. They're serious researchers examining the same data the AI analyzed. For the world, Russia's dissolution would be a double-edged sword. On one hand, it could end a major source of global aggression and open opportunities for freedom in places long suppressed by Moscow's imperial ambitions. On the other hand, the process could be chaotic and extraordinarily dangerous. A nuclear-armed state fragmenting into competing factions raises nightmares about loose weapons and rogue commanders that keep intelligence agencies awake at night. The transition would require careful international management, something the world isn't particularly good at. But here's the truth the AI made absolutely clear. Whether or not full dissolution happens, Russia is on a trajectory that cannot continue indefinitely. You cannot lose over 1 million casualties and call it a victory. You cannot record your lowest births in 2 centuries and call it stability. You cannot drain your reserves, alienate your brightest citizens, and sacrifice your future for a war your own soldiers are dying to escape, and expect the system to hold together forever. The empire won't explode in a single dramatic moment. It will dissolve, slowly at first, then all at once. And this time, we all get a front row seat to watch it happen. So, what do you think? Will Russia somehow muddle through these crises? Or are we watching the early stages of another imperial dissolution? Let us know in the comments, and if this video opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered before, subscribe to Fall of Nations for more analysis on how the world's powers rise, stumble, and fall.